morning, everybody. I'm Ralph Fertig. I'm president of the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, and delighted to have you here this morning. A beautiful morning in Santa Barbara, good for bicycling and walking and any healthy activities you choose to indulge in. We're delighted to have Professor John Pucher from Rutgers University is the main speaker this morning. It'll be followed by a panel including Council Member Grant House, Supervisor, I was going to say Susan Rose, Janet Wolf, and the Community Environmental Council's Michael Chiakos. So we'll do that. That'll take a half hour after that, and that'll be followed by an opportunity to ask your own questions to the four members who have spoken. So I'd like to introduce, this is being sponsored by three organizations in town. Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition is one, the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation, COAST, and their program of Santa Barbara Walks will be another sponsor, and the Coalition for Community Wellness will be a third. And about the Bicycle Coalition, we've been here since 1991. Well, we've been making changes, we're quite sure, in awareness and safety for people who bicycle within Santa Barbara County. And we're very pleased to offer this event to the community. I'd like to introduce Eva Inbar, who is the president of COAST, to say a little about what she's doing and they're doing.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you here to our presentation. I want to thank you for coming out on a beautiful Saturday morning when you maybe would have rather been to the beach or something else. I wanted to say a few words about COAST, although I hope most of you already know about us. We are an eight-year-old organization, and we encourage communities that are planned to promote biking, walking, and transit for all daily needs, so every day. This particular lecture is sponsored by Santa Barbara Walks, our newest major project, and I want to thank the Green Park Foundation and Stephen Murdoch, who is here, for sponsoring that project and making all of that possible. I don't see Courtney Dietz, our project director. She greeted you when you came in. She's outside. So when you see her, you can say hello to her. I would like to introduce then Dana Gober, the third organization who is co-sponsoring this event this morning. She's with the Coalition for Community Wellness. Dana?
Great. Good morning. My name is Dana Goba, and I'm with the Coalition for Community Wellness. We are only about a year and a half old organization, so I'm sure most people have not heard of us. The Coalition for Community Wellness started as an idea at a UCSB women's gaucho basketball game between Council Member Helene Schneider and Kathleen Rodriguez. And they just had this idea that there needs to be public health and urban planning need to be talking. And with the general plan update that's going on right now, the timing was absolutely perfect. So we got the major organizations for health in the city involved in this. And our organizations include representatives Jane Breckwald with the American Lung Association. Myself, I'm with Cottage Health System. Kathy Rodriguez is with the Medical Group Pathology Laboratory. And Margaret Weiss is with Sansom Clinic. We also have Allison Wallitzer with the Sansom Diabetes Research Institute. And Ann Patterson with the Santa Barbara County Public Health Department. And we have quite a few. We have Jeremy Meyer with the Santa Barbara Neighborhood Clinics, and we also have community member Christy Schurch, and that is our coalition. We also have many supporting organizations that have just been great. They believe in what we are doing. And those include COAST, Community Environmental Council, and the Santa Barbara County Medical Society. We have a complete list and more information on the back table. And if you would like to be a part of our email list as well, we also bring speakers to town such as this, and we would be happy to tell you about it. Thank you.
Professor John Pucher is currently in the Department of Urban Planning at Rutgers University. He received a BA in economics from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and then received a PhD in urban studies and planning from MIT. He's lived in Germany, the Czech Republic, Australia, Canada, and of course the United States. Among his different publications, ones that attracted my eye impacts of sprawl and car dependence on public health and active transport indicators in the USA, promoting safe walking and cycling to improve the health of children, and what might be my favorite, making bicycling irresistible, lessons from the Netherlands and Germany. We're delighted to have Professor Kruger talk this morning and join us. Thank you.
Now Don's going to do the magic of making this work.
Hello, everyone.
He's from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and you know they can do everything. Well, I'd like to thank all the groups who brought me here because it's just magnificent here in Santa Barbara. You just don't deserve this beauty. The weather, the scenery. I was walking on the beach this morning. You've got the mountains in one direction. You have the Pacific Ocean in the other direction, lined with palm trees. I mean, the topic of this talk is walking and cycling, and I don't know how you could not want to walk and cycle in this sort of environment. I mean, I do it in New Jersey, and if I can do it in New Jersey, you can do it here. I mean, really, I can walk and cycle when it's raining or snowing and it's yucky and there's no facilities whatsoever. And if I can do it in New Jersey, really, I think almost anyone can do it here in Santa Barbara. Well, I've already given away this secret topic to the talk, that is walking and cycling. But I think it's really important to realize just how important these modes of transportation are in our overall public policies. It used to be, going back maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, transportation planners, traffic engineers completely ignored walking and cycling. They weren't considered real modes of transportation unless you were in a car. That was really transportation. What people have been coming to learn, as they've been more and more enlightened, is that walking and cycling are among the very best, probably the best ways to get around in a number of different ways. Now, let's see if I can make this work. And in particular, they're by far the most sustainable modes of transportation. Some of you may know this term sustainability has actually three components. If you believe in the definition of the World Bank, for example, and a number of other organizations, it's first of all being environmentally friendly. Can anyone here imagine a way to get around our cities that is more environmentally friendly than walking and cycling? Virtually no air pollution, very little in the way of noise, very little in the way of non-renewable resources used. They're really great for the environment. Second, they're equitable. This is sort of the social dimension of sustainability. Virtually everyone can afford some sort of a bike or shoes to walk or to bike around. So almost everyone from an economic point of view is able to afford to walk and to cycle, and a large percentage, by the vast majority of people, are physically able to walk or to cycle. Just getting old doesn't mean you can't any longer walk or cycle, as you'll see later in this presentation. Clearly, there are certain kinds of disabilities that make it more difficult, or in some cases actually impossible, to walk or to cycle. But for the vast majority of people, walking and cycling are certainly feasible ways to get around. What about economical? This is the economic dimension of sustainability. Well, we all know it doesn't cost much. It doesn't cost the individual much to walk or to cycle. It's probably the cheapest way to get around. In addition to which, it doesn't cost much for the public sector. It costs much, much less to invest in sidewalks and in bikeways and bike paths than it does to build new interstate highways, I can tell you. And it's less also than it costs to build some new rail system. I'm all in favor of public transportation, by the way. But the city of Berlin, it's interesting, I'm sort of I go off on tangents all the time. But the city of Berlin is virtually bankrupt. And they consider investment in cycling facilities so economical that they say we can't afford to invest in any other mode of transportation except walking and cycling, because this is the way we save our money. This is the only transportation we can afford. So from a social point of view, an economic point of view, an environmental point of view, walking and cycling are just absolutely unbeatable. In addition to which, sort of in a way getting around to this now, walking and cycling are absolutely crucial to your health. They are really valuable ways of getting daily physical activity. I have a confession to make. I hate gyms. I always have, and I always will. I hate the gym equipment. For me, it's like torture equipment. You're more than welcome to do this, but I'm not the sort of a person who's going to go to the gym. I'm just not going to do it. I don't buy exercise equipment for my basement. I don't go to the gym. But I walk and I cycle every single day. I don't own a car, and so no matter what the weather's like, I have to walk or cycle to everywhere I get, combined with public transportation. This guarantees that whether I'm thinking about it or not, I don't make the explicit decision, I'm going to go out and get that exercise. I simply integrate that into my daily lifestyle. And I think that's the key, integrating this physical activity automatically, naturally, and usefully into our daily lifestyles. It's economical, it's good for our health, and we really do need to get a lot more physical activity. It's important for two reasons. To burn up calories. That way you could eat more. I had to give a talk to the Toronto City Council, and they went around the table, and each of the council persons said why they walked or they cycled. And there was one councilman, he said, well, he cycles because he can eat more cookies this way. You know, if that's your rationale for walking and cycling, great, you can eat more. So it's obviously important for burning up calories, and you can burn up a lot of calories walking and cycling, but totally aside from burning up calories, it's really important for your health. Look at this quote, and this is from the Journal of the American Medical Association, not exactly a radical organization. Totally aside from whether you're normal weight, obese, underweight, it turns out that not being physically active greatly increases the likelihood you're going to die prematurely. Well, I don't want any of us to die prematurely, don't we? And so really it's crucial not just for burning up calories and for fighting the obesity epidemic, but also it just really contributes to your both physical health and mental health. And when I see drivers of cars, they're, in New Jersey at least, I mean, they're almost homicidal. But I see people walking and cycling, they're smiling, they're in a good mood, and I'm thinking there's something to this. There are these serotonins, actually, when you walk and you cycle, you generate serotonins, and it turns out they really do put you in a better mood. So maybe this is why motorists are, in a worse mood than cyclists or walkers. The other issue, by the way, some of you might say, oh, yeah. Well, by walking and cycling, you're going to save money, but isn't this going to somehow waste your time? And the answer is no, it won't. The British Medical Association, another not at all radical organization, the British Medical Association did a study, and what they found is for every hour you walk or cycle, you add more than an hour to your expected healthy lifetime. Now, let me just repeat that, if I may. And even if I can't, I'm going to do it. For every hour you spend walking or cycling, you are adding another hour, more than an hour, to your expected healthy lifetime, meaning your lifetime without a major disability. This doesn't mean you're going to live forever, but it means you're going to live healthier much, much, much longer. And I think that is an appropriate goal. So anytime anyone tells you you're wasting your time walking and cycling, you just tell them that. I'm adding more than an hour to my expected healthy lifetime every time I'm walking and cycling. That's a pretty good reason for walking and cycling, if you ask me. Good news also, you don't have to run the marathon to get these health benefits. I'm not going to explain the details of this graph, but basically getting that first 30 minutes a day or maybe an hour a day even of physical activity generates huge health benefits. You don't have to run 10 miles a day to get these benefits. Even slight increases in physical activity are really, really important to your physical health. So it doesn't have to be a lot of time. I don't know what happened. This was in color. I saw it before. But what this is showing is we have very different levels of obesity around the world. And it's not because people in Japan or Ireland or Australia or Germany cannot afford to eat. I can assure you that the standard of living and the per capita income levels in these countries are fairly comparable. And yet look at this. In the United States, almost a third of adults are technically obese. This is with a body mass index of 30 or higher. And 2/3 of adult Americans are overweight. This is with a body mass index of 25 or higher. At any rate, it's sort of bad news. we're at the worst. We're there at about a third. The UK is the next, and then Australia. And as I say on this comment, is it that we speak English? I'm not sure exactly what the result is. But it's interesting. These countries with comparable standards of living have such dramatically different levels of obesity. What was your comment? I didn't.
18.5 is a low body mass index. If you go back a slide.
There we go. How do I go back? That?
18.5 is low. So, like you're underweight, you're under 18.5. So I can just say if that bottom row is showing body mass indexes.
No, it's the percentage of the adult population. This is the percentage. What's shown here is the percentage of the adult population which is technically obese. Okay, so it's not what you think it is. Got it? Is everyone clear on that? I don't want that confusion. Okay, so it's good that Korea and Japan only have whatever it is, 4% of their population being obese. Okay? Sure. And this is showing that in almost every state around the United States, you have an increase in the percentage of adults who are, in fact, obese. And there's something that's sort of another, the trends are in the wrong direction. The other issue, which is not clear from this, but I'll tell you it's the case, where obesity is the worst, namely in the Southeast, you have the lowest levels of walking and cycling in the entire United States. And it turns out in those states where you have the highest levels of walking and cycling, you tend to have lower levels of obesity. That is also, if I can get this to work now, if you look at another aspect of this problem, I think in a way it's the most troublesome to me aspect of the problem of obesity, and that's the tripling or actually even quadrupling of levels of obesity among children. Because it turns out that if you have an obese child, there's a very high, probably I think it's like 70% or so, that that person as an adult is also going to be obese. So it's really important to deal with this problem among children. Now, this is my personal opinion, and that is, it's a value, it's a question. I'll put it there. Does our car dependence here in the United States or anywhere in the world, does it increase the likelihood of obesity? If you look at the upward rising curve there, this is the combination of walking, cycling, and public transportation, which in most countries, certainly in Europe, they're considered the environmental or the green modes of transportation, sort of the main alternatives to the car for getting around our cities. And you can see there's huge differences in levels of walking, cycling, and transit among these countries, which have very comparable levels of income and standards of living. And what you see here is as people walk, cycle, and take transit more, they're far less likely to be obese. It doesn't prove causation at all. It simply says there's a very interesting inverse relationship between levels of walking, cycling, and transit use on the one hand and levels of obesity on the other. I think there's a number of reasons to think there is a logical and a causal relationship, but it certainly doesn't prove it. It simply says there's a very strong inverse relationship. And this focuses in particular on levels of walking and cycling in these 10 or so countries. Again, people in the Netherlands, let me tell you, are not poor. Sweden is not a poor country, and Switzerland most certainly is not a poor country. So these people in Europe, in these European countries and in Canada, they're not walking and cycling more than Americans because they can't afford cars. That's just not it at all. I'll show you why they are later, but just it's important to note this is almost a ratio of 10 to 1. It's like 8 to 1 in terms of the level of walk and bike trips, say, in the Netherlands, where you have about 45%, almost half of all trips made in the Netherlands by walking or cycling. In Denmark, also roughly 41% or so, anyway, more than 40% by walking and cycling and so forth. In most of these European countries, you're talking about roughly 30 to 40% of trips made by walking and cycling. And what do we have in the United States? Less than 10%. Huge difference. So it's not as a small difference. We're talking about quite a few times higher in these other countries. Virtually the same information in this next slide, but a different source. It simply is a different source of data, a different way of comparing the levels of walking and cycling. The previous slide is looking at the percentage of total trips, and this slide here is looking at the number of kilometers walked or cycled per person per day on average. And so this is simply showing you, again, it confirms what the previous slide showed. There's much, much higher levels of walking and cycling in these European countries, but also much higher, you don't see Canada there, but in all of these European countries, much higher levels of walking and cycling. Some of you might say, well, this is because trips are so much shorter in European cities that the only reason that Europeans walk and cycle more than Americans is because their trips are so much shorter. Not true. This controls for trip distance. Look very carefully at this chart. For trips, let's take them between 2 to 5 kilometers. Look at that. The Germans make almost a third, about 28% of all of their trips of that category, between 2 to 5 kilometers by walking or cycling. In the United States, it's only 3%. Same trip distance. You can control for each of those different trip distance categories. Every single category shows that Germans are walking and cycling much, much, much higher percentages. Now, it turns out it is also true that the average trip distance in European cities tends to be shorter than that in the United States. But the point of this is, even controlling for trip distances, Americans make a much too low a percentage of their trips by walking and cycling. Another point, you may wonder, why am I also considering public transportation in this? Why did I include the public transportation when I was looking at this inverse relationship between levels of obesity and levels of walking, cycling, and public transit? The reason is, it's an absolutely crucial complement to walking and cycling. There will inevitably be trips that are too long to walk and too long to cycle. And so you need to have a good public transportation system to take you on those trips that are simply too long to cover by walking and cycling. And in fact, it turns out that those people who use public transportation have twice as high a percentage, twice as high a likelihood to get the CDC's recommended level of physical activity every day. Because how do you usually get to a public transit bus stop or a train station? You either walk there or you cycle there. I mean, there are park and ride lots as well, but about 90% of all trips to public transit stops are walk trips. And so you're getting actually that really valuable exercise just walking to the public transportation. And by the way, if you're familiar with New York City, you get a lot of physical activity going up and down stairs, connecting between different subway lines, getting from the subway line to the bus line. You'd be surprised how much exercise you get even within the public transportation system. But the point here is that it's an absolutely crucial component of this alternative, a package of alternatives to the car. You can't just say we're just going to promote walking, we're just going to promote cycling. You must also improve your public transportation system and explicitly integrate them. Integrate the walking with the public transportation, integrate the cycling with the public transportation, and that is exactly what is done in the European cities, as I'll show you in just a second. Now, this is one of my favorite slides, so pay attention to this one too. Pay attention to all of them, but this one especially. I'm getting older, and guess what, folks? You're getting older too. You may not want to admit it, but we're all getting older. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to give up walking and cycling when I get older. And the good news is you don't have to. There are many Americans who would probably assume, well, once you get over the age of 60 or 65, forget it. You can't walk or cycle over the age of 60, 65. Just look at this. In Germany and the Netherlands, the percentage of the trips that are made by walking or cycling actually increases as people get older. The notion that we have in the United States that as you get older you have to be driven around everywhere is ridiculous. It's just not true. It is not the case that as we get older we are physically or mentally unable to walk or to cycle. I mean, there will be certain extreme, exceptional situations where that is the case. But what this is showing, and look at this, in the 75 and over category, look at both Germany and the Netherlands, in the 75 and over category, over half of the trips are being made there by walking or cycling. This is a tremendous benefit to these people. It means it maintains your social mobility, you can reach your neighbors, you can go shopping, you get that physical activity, it gives you the independence, it increases your sense of worth and mobility and accessibility to things you want to get to. It's a really important thing. And look at the United States. We have there 6.2% of trips made by people 65 and older are by walking or cycling, a tiny percentage. The good news to this is that physically, mentally, it is certainly possible for senior citizens to walk and cycle, and that being covering roughly half of all the trips they need to make can be made by walking and cycling. But we need to make walking and cycling safe, convenient, and feasible. That is the key. And that's what we're going to talk about now. How do we achieve all of this? How do we make walking and cycling feasible, safe, and convenient ways to get around? One of the most important ways you do it is you make it safe. This is something that's especially important for children, both in terms of traffic safety as well as safety from possible criminal attacks if they're walking to school alone. It's also important for senior citizens who tend to be more sensitive to these safety issues. It turns out that when surveys are done, that women say they really want separate cycling facilities. They don't want to have to cycle on the streets as much as men are willing to do, but actually I prefer separate cycling facilities as well. So one way you can certainly encourage walking and cycling is by making them safer. And it is certainly possible to make it safer. So you can forget the bad news on the left hand of this slide. That's showing how dangerous it currently is in the United States compared to these other countries. This is controlling for amounts of walking and cycling in each of these three countries, Germany, the United States, and the Netherlands, how dangerous it is in terms of fatalities, pedestrian fatalities per miles traveled, or pedestrian injuries per mile traveled, or here per kilometers traveled, or per number of trips. And so they're rates. We're not just looking at the totals, we're looking at per mile covered or per trip made, how dangerous is it? And the good news is, looking at the Netherlands, look how safe it can be made. 10 times safer than in the United States. And when I see this, I'm thinking, wow, I would want to go to the Netherlands and see what they're doing to make things safer there. How is it that the Dutch are able to make walking and cycling 10 times safer than it is in the United States? I'll try to show you that in just a second. One way you can do it, and this is a good friend and a colleague of mine in Sacramento, Peter Jacobson, published an article in Injury Prevention magazine called Safety in Numbers. And what he showed is, as more and more people walk and cycle, they become safer and safer for a number of reasons. For one thing, the more walking and the cycling you have, the more aware everyone is of the presence of cyclists and pedestrians. But in particular, the more aware motorists are of the presence of cyclists and pedestrians, and the need to drive in a way that avoids endangering pedestrians and cyclists. And so this very issue of visibility and awareness, the more you have, I was in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam this past summer, and there's no missing the cyclists in Amsterdam, I'll tell you that. They're everywhere. You know they're everywhere. I mean, they're the majority, actually. And so that issue of visibility is really important in avoiding accidents. In New Jersey, many motorists, they just don't even think about cyclists being on the roadway. And so whether they're making right-hand turn, left-hand turn, changing lanes, it's almost as if the cyclists are invisible, and that is really, really dangerous. There's also the problem of homicidal New Jersey motorists, but that's another issue. The other issue is increased respect. That is, the larger the percentage of your population, which is walking and cycling, the more respect you get. You really do. If you go, I was living in Munster in northern Germany for almost 3 years, and everyone cycles. I mean, nuns cycle, the bishop cycles, the post delivery, mail gets delivered by bike, everyone bicycles. And so it seems to be a very respectable way to get around. Everyone does it. And the more people, the higher the percentage of people who walk and bike, the greater the respect cyclists and pedestrians get. And the last one is, the more cycling and walking that you have, the more political support and public support you have for providing really good facilities, whether they be bike parking facilities, good sidewalks, good crosswalks, and so forth and so on, or car-free zones, traffic calming, which we'll talk about in a second. And yes, we can, here in the United States, in California, and in New Jersey even, make cycling safer and walking as well safer, more convenient, more feasible as ways to get around our cities every day. And the most important way to do this, I believe, is truly through public policies. The reason that Europeans, in particular the Dutch, the Germans, the Swedes, the Danes, the reason they walk and cycle more is not because their genes are different, that they were just born to walk and to cycle, and that Americans were born to drive cars. I don't believe that for a second. Because when you get Americans taking vacations over in Europe, they love the idea of cycling. They love walking through car-free zones. They love taking the great transit in Europe. Then they come back to the United States, and they're back to driving their cars again. And the reverse is also true. I had many, many, many European students in our program. I remember Jose, who's from Spain, the first thing he did when he came to our program, he bought this gigantic car. And I said, Jose, what are you doing? Why would you buy such a gigantic car? And he said, well, it's the only time in his entire life he'll ever be able to be so wasteful that he would never be able to afford to do this back in Spain. So I think it's the conditions we're faced with. The reasons we don't walk and cycle is that in many cities, in many states of this country, we make cycling dangerous, unpleasant, and the same thing for walking, by the way. In both walking and cycling, we need to change those conditions. And if you think they were always favorable in Europe, you're wrong. Many European countries undertook vast efforts to totally turn around their car-friendly policies of the 1950s, 1960s, and instead encourage walking, cycling, and transit. And I want to show you some pictures to prove this. Because you're not going to believe it. Americans just don't believe it. They think, oh, no, no, no. Europe was always, always, always pedestrian-friendly, cycling-friendly, transit-friendly. Just not true. This is a picture of Lörrach in southwest Germany. It's a sort of a smaller sort of a town, regional capital of that particular area. And you can see this is in 1953. This is before the big car boom. And you can see people, lots of people cycling, and this is what the town looked like. Take a look where that arrow is at that, it's a fountain. It'll say Brunnen in German, fountain. I'll let Eva translate for me if I can't think of it. Okay, this is, keep an eye on that fountain there. Okay, now this is in 1950s. This is what happened in early 1970s. In my personal point of view, very ugly. It's very car-oriented. Very little cycling here. There's no special facilities. The town is basically taken over by the car. There's that fountain again. Then, this is what they did. They said, we don't want cars. I mean, there was really virtually a revolution, in a sense, in transportation policy. And they said, you know, this is really a bad idea. These cars are killing people. They're polluting the environment. They're noisy. They're totally destroying the centers of our cities. And so in city after city after city, and I mean we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cities, and not just in Germany, but in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden, really throughout Northern Europe, where they basically banned the car from the center of the city. And this is where the fountain is again. You see lots of walking here. It's mainly a pedestrian zone, but you can see at that fountain lots and lots of bikes parked. So the bicyclists would bicycle to this pedestrian zone and then walk once they're in the pedestrian zone. See, there's another sort of multimodal. I mean, that's why, I bike for the longer distance and I will walk for the shorter distance. This is the same, this is a town nearby, this is Freiburg, Germany, a town of about 250,000, 200,000 in southwest Germany again. Look at this. Before the transportation reforms, it was a bridge for cars. Now it's a bicycling bridge. Doesn't the right-hand one look better? Yes. Same town, Freiburg. This was a street dominated by cars before the transportation reforms. Now they've traffic calmed it, and it looks very, very nice. It's safer. Incidentally, just in terms of traffic calming, they did a number of studies for German cities, English cities, Dutch cities, Danish cities. What they found is, as a result of traffic calming, they had almost overnight a 60 to 80% decline in child traffic fatalities. 60 to 80%, folks. If ever you needed a rationale for traffic calming, if you care anything about kids and keeping them healthy and alive, traffic calming certainly had that effect in all the studies I have ever seen. So anyway, it also looks better, of course, as well. To the left, upper left, is what the cathedral square looked like. It's half of the cathedral square, actually. The cathedral is just to the left of the photograph. And you can see it was nothing but a parking lot. It was literally nothing more than a parking lot. I don't see any people, hardly any. And to the right, they then took out the cars. No more parked cars. It's a market, sort of like you have here on the corner. Very nice market. But it's 6 days of the week. It's a market, and otherwise it's always car-free at any rate. So again, a big change there. The other issue, in terms of how that had an impact on travel behavior, it's, again, I guess the point I was trying to make is that you can change travel behavior. You really can increase walking and cycling. And it was not always so friendly to walking and cycling in German cities, just as an example. Look at these cities. These are big cities: Munich, Nuremberg, Cologne, Freiburg, and so forth. They managed to double or triple the percentage of their trips by cycling. Look at Munich. In 1976, this is just at the beginning of the reforms, only 6% of trips by cycling. They more than doubled it to 13%. This is truly a large percentage shift, folks. We have been at about 0.9% of trips by bike in the United States for about 3 decades. And it's really difficult to increase that. We've had troubles increasing that percentage. But you can see, if you implement the right set of policies, you can have truly dramatic improvements and increases in cycling and in walking. The other incentive we don't have nearly as much in the United States, and that's the price of gasoline. As you can see here, the trend over time, this goes through 2008, that one of the advantages, one of the sticks, I guess you would call it, in terms of policy, that encourage people to walk and to cycle and to take transit are, in fact, the higher prices of gasoline. And let me tell you, folks, it has nothing whatsoever to do with the base price of petroleum. This is all due to taxation. So you have almost all the difference in taxes are due to, difference in prices are due to the tremendously higher taxes in these European countries. And in both Germany and the UK, they had explicitly an environmental tax that was part of the price of gasoline, and it had an automatic inflator, so every year it automatically increased a lot. I know it's a politically difficult thing to do in the United States, but it really is an encouragement then to people to walk, to cycle, and to take transit. So you can either provide the sort of the pull, that is having better and better walking, cycling, and transit facilities, better integrated with each other as well, but also the push out of the automobile, the stick policy saying you've got to make it more expensive. And it's not just punishing the car driver, it's recognition of those environmental, social, environmental, and economic costs of car use. You're saying the car driver is imposing those costs on the rest of society, and it really is only fair that they should be charged for this. And in Europe, it's taken into account, and it's really done. By the way, in Denmark, I can't resist telling you this, it's not just the price of gasoline, it's also sales taxes on new cars. In Denmark, hold on to your seats, or your hats, they have a 186% tax when you buy a new car. When I first saw this, I thought this has got to be a typo. I called up my friends at the Ministry of Transport in Copenhagen. Oh, no. This is the way it is in the Denmark. You pay for 3 cars, but you only get to keep 1. Now, folks, if you had to pay 186% tax on gasoline, you might think twice about making on new cars. You'd have fewer cars. As a result, by the way, the Danes have among the lowest levels of car ownership in all of Europe. How do we encourage? What about the pull strategies to get people to walk and cycle more? Better walking and cycling facilities, an obvious one, integrating cycling and walking with public transportation. Traffic calming, I think, is absolutely key. Mixed-use zoning, mixing residential with commercial, so you're more likely to be able to walk to the store or walk to school or cycle to school. Restrictions on car use, car-free zones, reduced speed limits and so forth. Traffic education, safe routes to school, absolutely key. Traffic regulations and enforcement, and when motorists don't stop for pedestrians in crosswalks, arrest them, put them in, well, maybe, anyway, impose severe fines. In New Jersey, I would say 95% of motorists do not stop for pedestrians in crosswalks. And I have complained so many times with op-ed pieces, letters to the editor, complaints to the police department, and no one does anything about it. You really, it's different from California, you'll be happy to know, but it's really important to enforce the legal rights of cyclists to cycle on the roadways and of pedestrians to be on crosswalks and so forth. Better cycling and walking facilities. I don't want to take up too much time, but I certainly want to explain a little bit of these. One, make all streets more bikeable, but also introduce significant systems, well-integrated, connected systems of bike lanes and bike paths. You don't want to have, well, here's a really nice bike path there, but there's no way to get from there to over there where we have the next lane. And so you have to have a connected, integrated bikeway system so that you don't have these gaps, because people feel then very uncomfortable with these gaps, and they are more dangerous. Good sidewalks, good crosswalks. I mean, there really are examples of superbly designed crosswalks and intersections and so forth. It's not a secret. You can go to cities, even here in the United States, you don't have to cross the Atlantic Ocean to get to Europe to see these. You can go to Canada, you can go to lots of other cities here in the United States where they actually have been successful in producing better walking and cycling facilities. Bike parking, intersection modifications, advanced green lights for cyclists. I'll show all of these to you in a second. The pictures are more fun than the words anyway. Car-free zones. This is the city actually where I lived in Munster for almost 3 years, and you can see this is the main street in Munster. It's car-free, no cars at all. You can bike, you can walk. And I've never actually even seen any conflict of any kind between the cyclists and the pedestrians. For sure, they occur once in a while, but just to show you how safe it is to cycle in Munster. People have this notion in the United States that cycling is really dangerous, and it is more dangerous than it is in Europe. In this particular city, they have only one cycling injury, not even fatality, one cycling injury per 608,000 bike trips. Let me just repeat that. One cycling injury per 608,000 bike trips. That's no wonder that everyone cycles and they feel safe cycling, and nobody even wears a helmet, as you can see here. They just don't, not even kids. by the way, I'm in favor of wearing helmets here in the United States, so don't get me wrong on that. I don't really like helmet use laws, but just to show you, you'll see as you see these other pictures in Europe, almost no one is wearing a helmet. This is a very nice pedestrian zone in downtown Copenhagen. And you can see also they're very good here at sort of separating the pedestrians from the cyclists to avoid possible conflicts. It's just easy. It's better for the cyclists. It's better for the pedestrians. Sometimes you don't have any choice to have a mixed-use path, but if you can separate them, it's just that cyclists are going at a different speed, a different type of a movement, and I think it's just safer and more convenient, more pleasant for everyone if you have the space to separate the two. Uh-oh. There we go. Oops. Oh, I went too far. You do have good crosswalks sometimes. I had to include some good things that you're doing here in Santa Barbara. So this is a nice crosswalk. I like the bulb out. I like the fact that you have the ramp that goes to the street level. You have it gives you a better grip and so forth. It's a nice design, I think. That's a well-designed crosswalk. But then you also have, actually this morning, I was walking across whatever street that is to get over where the beaches are, and I was running like mad to get across a very wide street. There was a crosswalk, but it was really difficult. There was no median. It was difficult to get across the entire street, even running. The bottom one, to me, is a much safer crosswalk and much more pleasant. You're not as rushed. Another thing they have in Germany and also the Netherlands is these so-called bicycle streets. Here we have something called bicycling boulevards. I've seen them in Portland and Berkeley, California. They have them. But these are throughout Germany, Netherlands. You have basically narrow streets, and the bicyclist has the right-of-way over the entire width of the street. The cars are permitted to use these streets, but only at the mercy of the cyclists. So you can't toot your horn, you can't rush the cyclists. They have the main right to be on these narrow streets, although cars are permitted. So the sign on the right says Fahrradstraße, which means bicycling street, and Kfz frei means motor vehicles permitted, but again, only at the mercy of the cyclists. Not that the cyclists do anything nasty to the motorists, but this is a very nice bike path in Münster, Germany, and it's a wonderful one. 6 kilometers. It encircles the entire old part of the town. It used to be the town wall, actually, and they tore down the town wall in, I guess, it was the 19th century, and instead of building a road, they built this very, very nice, they call it the promenade. But you can see what's nice here is this, again, this principle of the separation of the pedestrian and the cyclist to the extent possible. On both of the sides, left and right, you have walking paths, very nice walking paths, and then you have a very, very nice cycling path in the middle, and trees and so forth, and that's my bike parked off to the left because I want to take this picture. But just to show you the consideration they have, to the left is the soft walking surface, and to the right they have a hard walking surface, so you even can choose between those. Oh, that was really good. Oops, I'm going too far here. But I thought this was a really nice facility here in Santa Barbara. So, let's give Santa Barbara some credit for doing some good things too. You have some really nice facilities, and they look even better with the palm trees in the background. The other thing you can do in terms of bicycling facilities is these so-called contraflow lanes. So you put in, unfortunately, these are not terribly clear to be seen, but if you it allows the cyclist to go in both directions, and the motor vehicle can only go in one direction. So it gives the cyclist more flexibility and allows the cyclist to go in both directions. And this is in Vancouver. I was in Vancouver in May and had a wonderful time looking at their facilities there. Very low cost, by the way. These are not expensive facilities at all. As you can see, this is another example where the bicyclist is going in both directions. The car can only go in one direction. This is a very, very common, this slide here is showing, this is a particular picture of Münster, Germany again, but you can look at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of German, Danish, Dutch cities. These are called falsche Einbahnstraßen, and it means false one-way streets. So that in almost all of these residential streets, they're one-way for cars, but they're two-way for cyclists. And so that sign, the red sign at the top there, indicates cars cannot go in that direction, but bicycles may. The FREI means the bicycles are exempted from this particular restriction. Basically, what this slide is showing is bicycles can turn to the left, they can turn to the right, they can go straight ahead, they can go in either direction, but the motorists are much, much more restricted in the routes that they can take and the directions that they can take. So what is this doing? It's increasing the speed and the flexibility, the connectivity of cycling, and it restricts the speed and the connectivity and the flexibility and the convenience of driving a car, which is what we want to do. This is an example of Freiburg again. This is their entire center of the city is car-free. You can have the trams, the streetcars, you have cyclists, you have the pedestrians. And I've been there many times. I was there just this summer, as a matter of fact. And again, I've just never seen conflict. Somehow, if people are reasonable and understanding and a little bit patient, even these three modes in this particular environment can get along very well. You don't have cyclists going 50 miles an hour, and the trams slow down so they don't run over the pedestrians and so forth. It really does seem to work. Just an example of the extent of cycling facilities in Berlin, which is the largest city in Germany, they have about almost 1,000 kilometers of separate facilities of one sort or another, cycle paths, cycle lanes, bike lanes, so about 1,000 kilometers of separate facilities. But to me, what is the most impressive is that they have 4,000 kilometers of traffic calm streets. 4,000 kilometers. 72% of all streets in Berlin are traffic calm. This is not a little village. It's not Davis, California. This is a big, major city, and they have traffic calm. And when I say traffic calming, that's 30 kilometers an hour or less. They've traffic calmed 72% of all their streets, and that makes them perfect for cycling. This is in Odense, Denmark, and you can see they've had an interesting design here. It's a sort of a common, it's almost like a bike lane, but it's a bike path. But you can't see it too well, but there's a curb. If I had a pointer, I would show it to you. To the right, I can't because that way I lose the sound. If you look at to the right, there's a curb there. It's a curb that helps separate that bike path or lane from the motor vehicles. So it's more protection, just a regular bike lane. It's a bike path, but it's sort of positioned as if it were a bike lane. So you have the curbs that are very valuable protection, I would say, there in Odense, Denmark. And here's a bike lane. This is on, how do you pronounce this, Castilla Street? And so this is sort of, the advantage of this lane is it's far enough out from the cars that you're less likely to get doored. So you want a wide lane that's far enough from the cars, and it's certainly not as heavily used as the facilities you've seen in Denmark and Germany, but I think it's a good start. It's a really nice facility there. There we go. I mentioned the issue of connectivity. This is a map of the cycling network in Freiburg, Germany. Again, there's about 200,000 people, something like that. And I know the person who's the head of cycling planning for Freiburg, and he said, when you're giving this talk, I want you to emphasize just how connected our facilities are. We feel that having just a bike path here, a bike lane here, that's just not going to work. And so this does not even include their traffic calm streets. All residential streets in Freiburg are traffic calm. So you have all residential streets with a speed limit of 30 kilometers or less, plus you have this network of bike lanes and completely separate bike paths. So basically you can get from any corner of the city to any other part of the city on separate facilities, on a lane, a path, or on traffic calm streets. It really, really encourages a wide spectrum of the population to cycle. Women, every bit as much as men, the elderly, children, and so forth. This is an example of a cut-through. So again, you have these artificial dead ends. This happens to be in Melbourne. I was in Melbourne several times. It's a cut-through for cyclists and for pedestrians as well, but obviously it's a dead end for cars. Why is this important? It deters through traffic through these neighborhoods. It makes car use less convenient. It makes it slower, and it increases the safety of walking and cycling. It makes these neighborhoods more pleasant to live in and allows kids to play in the streets. I think that's a really important advantage to this particular design. This is a cut-through that I used all the time when I was living in Sydney 2 years ago, and it's both for pedestrians and cyclists. You can barely see the pedestrian walking there, but it was very, very convenient. There was a bench over there with my little knapsack on it. In fact, I would sit and take a little rest. But the reason this got built, this is a whole area actually just to the west of the university. It used to be these were all throughways for, you could go through by car. There was a child. I was talking to one of the neighbors right here, and I said, this is a really, really nice cut through here for pedestrians and cyclists. He said, do you know the history of this? I said, no. He says, well, it turns out these sorts of passageways were used by motor vehicles, by even 18-wheeler trucks, it's called rat running in Australia. Rather than going on the main street, having to stop at the red lights, that they were going through neighborhood streets to sort of avoid those sorts of traffic signals. And there was a child who was killed. And finally, there was enough community outrage that they said, this is the end of this. And literally dozens and dozens of these sorts of situations were then cut off for motor vehicle traffic, and they were made cut-throughs for pedestrians and cyclists. I don't know why there's a delay. There we go. Likewise, you have mixed-use paths of various kinds. I don't want to go into this in too much detail because it will take too much time, and I'm running out of time. This is, okay. The other thing I wanted to emphasize, I've shown a number of slides of nice bicycling and pedestrian facilities in the centers of cities. But again, my European friends say, I want you to emphasize that every new suburban development here in Germany and the Netherlands and Denmark has, as part of the basic required infrastructure, sidewalks and bike facilities, whether it's a path or a lane, or traffic calm streets. One of those combinations. So it's inconceivable to build a new suburban development without those sorts of infrastructure already in place, the sidewalks and the bicycling facilities, or a perfectly sort of traffic calm street, which I'll show you a picture of just a second. So it's not just in the center of the cities, but their zoning ordinance and building codes require that those walking and cycling facilities be there right at the start, or the development is not even approved. Give cyclists, and also pedestrians, I would say, but give cyclists an advanced green light. In almost all these cities I've been discussing, at many, many, many intersections, the cyclist gets the advanced green light, goes through the intersection, and then the cars get to stop. I have not really found any city, I don't think yet, in the United States where you have cyclists getting an advanced green light. It might exist somewhere, but I'm not really familiar with it, if it does exist. You can also very nicely highlight the crossings of bike paths and bike lanes at these intersections. Again, it's a warning to motorists. It's saying, watch out. There are going to be cyclists crossing here. It's just another way you could increase the safety of cyclists. And again, this is in Munster, a town with one cycling injury for every 608,000 bike trips. And maybe this is something that contributes toward that. This I thought was neat. This is in Odense, Denmark. Again, I think it's the second largest city in Denmark. They have the Green Wave for cyclists. Now, folks, if you want to see something neat, look at this. You see those green, those bollards to the right of where the woman is cycling there? They have these flashing sort of laser lights. And these lights proceed in a certain wave at the speed of, I guess it's like 22 kilometers an hour. It's the speed they're expecting the cyclist to be traveling, so that if the cyclist keeps up with this wave of green lights on the bollards, the cyclist will always get a green light at every intersection. I mean, none of this green wave stuff for motorists. The green wave is for cyclists. And they understand that for long distance routes, that cyclists are traveling at a different rate of speed as for short routes. And so they adjust the speed. They do surveys. They actually measure, okay, what's the average cycling speed? There's obviously a range, but they try to somehow get the median, the average kind of cycling speed, and they adjust the green wave to fit the cyclist speed. Now, that's what I call being very considerate to the cyclist. This is also in Odense, Denmark. This is in Odense, Denmark. Also, I thought, really nice informational signs. To the left, Susan Handy, actually, who's a professor at UC Davis, took these photos for me. But to the left, a really, really nice directional sign there showing you where the nearest train station, nearest bus station, the different routes of the different bike routes there. And to the right, they have an automatic bike counter. So it actually counts the number of bike trips going past, and then you can see it actually is like going up a column at the end of the day. And so cyclists per day is what that says in Danish. And you can actually see this digital readout of how many cyclists are passing by. It's just sort of neat. If I had this, I'd probably cycle around again and again and again and again to raise the total there. But I just thought that was really, really neat. How about air pumps? I mean, isn't that neat that they actually have throughout the city of Odense, they have these free air pumps for people who want to pump up their tires. I mean, not a bad idea, huh? It's just a nice, thoughtful thing to have. And how about this? Let's stop giving people free parking for their cars and instead give people free bikes. And that's what they do in Odense, Denmark. They actually have a special program where the employers, the firms, give their employees free bikes. Now, I have a colleague at UC Davis, another colleague, Dan Sperling, who works on electric vehicles. And, you're trying to get this zero emissions vehicle for years and years. We've got it, folks. You don't have to invent it. It's already here, and it's called the bike. So, I mean, in terms of, if you want a really good zero emissions vehicle, we've got it in terms of the bike. Other things you can do, these sort of shortcuts, don't have time to explain everything going on here, but lots of, to the right here, this is a T intersection, so why should the cyclist have to stop? And what the sign says is in fact that the cyclist is exempted from that particular traffic signal. To the left, the cyclist doesn't even have to go to the intersection, already there's a shortcut going to the right to get the cyclist off to the right where the cyclist is headed. This is maybe my favorite. This is a special intersection. Well, not special. It's a typical intersection here in Munster. And what you see here is, first of all, you have a special lane to the right, which lets the cyclists get to the front of the intersection. And then what you can't see, and if I had a pointer, I'd show it to you, there's a little white sign there. And the sign says, when the traffic light is red, the cars have to stop at the advanced stop line. Cyclists are instructed to fill up the entire space in front of the cars, and then the cyclists get the advanced green light. And so in the second phase, you can see they're already in the middle of the intersection before the cars can stop. Now, this is safer, it's more pleasant. Why should I, as a cyclist, have to wait behind the cars, inhale all the exhaust fumes, and then have the cars go in front of me? I mean, I would much rather have this situation. It's safer, it's faster, and it's more pleasant, I would say, for the cyclists. Traffic calming. I know I have to speed up a little. All sorts of kinds of traffic calming. I can't go through everything, but it's certainly more than just speed humps. This is just, I'm certainly not going to go through this. But there's probably, I don't know, 50 or 60 different kinds of traffic calming. And it's a matter of choosing the right combination of traffic calming techniques to make sure it's the right combination that works in that specific situation. So rather, I know in the town where I live in New Jersey in Highland Park, the mayor thinks that the only thing that exists is speed humps. And so that's just about all we have. And there's so many other things that can be implemented either in combination with that or instead of that. And I think you have to be sensitive to what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to reduce the volume of travel, the speed of travel, deter through traffic? It all makes a difference, sort of which measure you want to choose. And the reason you want to introduce traffic calming of one sort or another, whether through physical infrastructure measures or simply through speed limits, look at this graph. Speed really does kill. This is the likelihood of a pedestrian surviving a crash with a motor vehicle. Once you get above 30 kilometers an hour, you have a dramatic increase in the percentage of that pedestrian, the likelihood that pedestrian will be killed. And that is why I would say that the 30-kilometer-an-hour limit, which is about 19 miles an hour, is generally the standard for traffic calming in European cities. So it really, really is important. That's why traffic calming saves lives. All these different examples of speed humps and neck downs and bulbs out and so forth and so on, you've probably seen these. Another example, you can combine the traffic calming measures with then prioritizing cycling. So here, you, again, allowing the cyclist two-directional travel, limiting to one direction, at the same time traffic calming. Another example of traffic calming here in Vancouver. This is a very, I really want to show this. This is in Freiburg, Germany. Very typical scene in Freiburg. Look, there's almost nothing in the way of infrastructure there. It's the two big bollards. It's the sign. This is not an expensive thing to do. And in fact, you can't see it terribly well here, but that sign on the pavement designates this as it's called Spielstraße, literally a play street. And that sign indicates the speed limit is even less than 30 kilometers an hour. It's 7 kilometers an hour. And that's why you see the kid playing in the sign. It says the kid is playing. This is meant to be part of their front yard. And so it's a place where people can walk, where they can cycle, where the kids can play. Cars are allowed, but at the speed of 7 kilometers an hour, or walking speed, actually, is what it's supposed to be. And you can see it doesn't really require much in the way of infrastructure. People who claim that traffic calming has to be an extremely elaborate, expensive thing are just wrong. You can see this example right here. This is another example. In this case, again, you can see the sign to the left. It's a Spielstraße, 7 kilometers an hour. And in that sort of a street, they didn't even need to put in a sidewalk at all. They said, well, everybody's much right to walk on the street, and so in that case, you can even do without the sidewalk. This is a little bit more elaborate traffic calming. Clearly, they've narrowed the street. This is also in Freiburg, and this is the case where it's just 30 kilometers an hour. It's not the 7 kilometer an hour version, but clearly it's a very attractive and cycling-friendly sort of a situation. Combining mass transit with cycling and with walking as well, I think is really important. Being able to take your vehicle on the bus, on the rail vehicle, having good parking at train stations, I think is really, really important. This is the main train station. It's the parking facility at the main train station in Munster. 3,500 bikes parked there. They have long-term, medium-term, short-term parking. They have bike rentals, bike repairs. They have touring advice, and they have a bike wash, believe it or not. Can you believe it? A bike wash. If this goes forward. There we go. And that's it. You thought I was just kidding, huh? They have a bike wash, folks. Now, you can't beat that. And you have a nice bike station here in Santa Barbara as well. So, I mean, again, I think you're doing good things here in Santa Barbara. I like a lot of the paths I've seen, some of the traffic calming and so forth. And you can really have some good parking here in the United States as well, even if it doesn't hold 3,500 bikes. But you can also do simple things. I mean, this is just nothing but a bus stop here in Odense, Denmark. Nothing but a bus stop. And yet, just very practical, very simple sort of bike parking. You know, you bike to the bus stop, and then you take the bus. And you have, again, bike and ride here is actually pretty prevalent in the United States. You have over 50,000 buses in the United States now come equipped with bike racks. And it's about 2/3 of all buses and increasing year by year. A very good thing. Converting car parking into bike parking. I'm all for it. I guess I do hate cars. Anyway, so I obviously don't need that car parking. I'd much rather have the bike parking. But you can get about 10 bikes parked for every one car. So it's a pretty good trade-off. This is a particular situation here in San Francisco. Traffic education is extremely important. I think it's even more important training motorists than it is training the cyclists and the pedestrians, but you clearly have to do both, no question about it. An example of this is from the official German driving test. So I have to explain this because it might not be clear. With each of these pictures, there's a multiple choice. There's 4 possible answers. It says A, B, C, D, and so forth, sort of like taking the SAT. And in every case, you have the upper right, upper left, and down to the lower left. The right answer is yield to the pedestrian. You as a motorist, so you're driving that car, you're behind the wheel there. What are you supposed to do? Yield to the pedestrian, yield to the cyclist, and so forth. To the lower right puzzled me. And take a look at that picture to the lower right and just wonder what that might mean, because I wasn't sure. And my former doctoral student, who's German, I said, Ralph, and he's the one who downloaded this for me. I said, Ralph, I don't understand that. What's going on? He said, well, in Germany, motorists are trained that it is their legal responsibility to avoid possibly endangering a child or elderly cyclist or pedestrian. And if during the driving portion of your test you do not actively demonstrate that you are anticipating the possibility that you might, in whatever you're doing, endanger a cyclist or a pedestrian who is a child or a senior citizen, you fail the test. Ralph failed the test twice. Not because he did anything dramatic, not this Ralph, not because he did anything dramatically wrong. He did not demonstrate that he was actively looking out to avoid endangering child or senior citizen pedestrians or cyclists. Wow. I don't know about California, but that's not the way motorist training gets done in New Jersey. I mean, can you imagine? And literally it is the legal responsibility of the motorist. It's assumed that the motorist, you're driving the more dangerous vehicle, it's going faster, it creates it is what is really causing the danger and generating the traffic danger. It's not the walking or the cycling, and therefore the main responsibility is on you. And this really does put motorists on the defensive. First of all, they're really trained to do this, but also they know legally they are on the defensive, and that makes a big difference. You can train also in terms of cycling training, both adults and children. I think that's also important to train people in safe cycling and walking skills. And it doesn't matter what age. You can be young, you can be old. There are a lot of people who are middle-aged or older who decide, I sort of like to learn how to cycle. This is a case in Vancouver where they have cycling courses specifically for older people, not necessarily elderly, but anyway, older people and not just for kids. But I thought was really neat in Germany and the Netherlands, every single kid in Germany and the Netherlands, by the time they're in the 3rd or the 4th grade, they've had extensive lessons in safe and effective cycling and also walking. They get tested by a real policeman. First, they go to the course on the upper left is fenced off. It's a sort of without real traffic of cars going around. First, they have this training course. They're actually on their bikes. And they learn to understand what the signs mean, how you go on your bike, and so forth. Then the policeman goes out with these kids on real streets with real traffic. And they do the same thing on the real streets in the real traffic. They're tested by the policeman. They get actually a certificate. They get a sticker for their bike. It's a big deal. I mean, we have a regular exchange program with Germany in our graduate school, and one of the students was saying his biggest thrill in his entire life was getting the highest test in this bicycling test. It was just incredible. Safe routes to school, I think, is also really important. Again, I think it's really key to get people starting to walk and to cycle at a young age. If you get them into the habit of riding in a car, being driven everywhere, and then driving a car themselves, it's hard to get people back into the habit, I think, of walking and cycling. And this is particularly, I think, tragic, what's happened in the United States, where we've tremendously reduced here. We've lost a lot of the walking and the cycling to schools, whereas almost every Dutch, German, Danish, Swedish kid either walks or cycles to school or takes some form of public transportation. They just don't get chauffeured to school by their parents. Whereas here in the United States, now it's, where was it? I'm not sure the percentage, we'll see it later, but the vast majority of American kids now actually get chauffeured to school. So they're not getting that valuable physical activity, and look what's happening as a result. You can see a tremendous decline in the percentage of kids who walk to school. It was, looking at the left-hand axis, from 40% down to, I guess it's something like 10%, and the level of obesity, conversely, going up, and quadrupling actually over the same period. So I think it's bad for the kids for a number of reasons. You're taking away their independence. You're making them dependent on you. It's bad for the environment. I mean, the biggest traffic congestion I see in our town, actually, is when parents are taking their kids to school, and then they end up running over other parents' kids. It's a traffic danger problem. It's an environmental problem. It's a waste of energy. And then also, you're taking away that physical activity from those kids. And I just think in all four of those respects, it's bad news that American kids get chauffeured to school by their parents or by someone else. You need good crosswalks you've got to have. But you can do it. This is Goleta. The whole notion of safe routes to schools, walking, school buses, and the same thing sort of with bikes, having groups bicycling together to school. It's safer. I think it's more fun. I think it's safe both in terms of safety from criminals, also greater safety in terms of traffic safety. Certainly it's a more visible group. It's a chaperone group, so it's safe from that point of view. I think it's good exercise for the parents as well. I mean, the kids are getting exercise, the parents are getting exercise. It's good for the environment, better for traffic congestion, energy use. I mean, you name it. I think it's a win-win situation. Mixed-use zoning, I'm almost finished now, but mixed-use zoning I think is also key. I mean, clearly it is true that the length of a trip makes a difference into whether you can cover it by walking and cycling. And to the extent that you can encourage zoning codes, building codes, development policies that encourages mixed-use zoning of having residential and commercial and schools and churches and so forth close together to each other so that they're within walking and cycling distance, I do think it's a really, really important policy, and you really, really need to promote that as well. Traffic regulations and enforcement, I do think, above all, we need to enforce the existing regulations. I mean, in most states of the United States, cyclists, for example, have the legal right to ride on most roads. And yet most police don't even know that, or if they know it, they ignore it, and they tell you it's illegal, you can't cycle on this road when it actually is perfectly legal. But likewise, why not enforce the rights of pedestrians to be on crosswalks and to force motorists to stop for pedestrians in crosswalks? In New Jersey, I think one of the big differences between California and New Jersey, it's not the law, it's the degree of enforcement. The police and the courts in New Jersey have been explicitly instructed, don't bother giving a summons to a motorist who doesn't stop for a pedestrian in a crosswalk, because we're dealing with murders and rapes and all sorts of more serious crimes, and courts have simply sent this message to the police: we don't want to hear these cases. Don't issue summonses, we just don't have time for them. But what's the result? Motorists in New Jersey simply don't respect at all the rights of pedestrians in crosswalks. You really need to enforce those rights. You just try to do something like this in Germany or the Netherlands or Denmark, and you will find you're going to get summons, and you're going to have to pay a very severe fine, and it's going to have really long-term consequences. So I think two things. First of all, I really do think the legal rights ought to be on the side of the more vulnerable people in our traffic, the pedestrians and the cyclists, and those rights do need to be, I think, much, much more enforced than they are currently. So now I'm at the end. What are the conclusions of all this? Number one, there are a lot of really, really good reasons to support walking and cycling. Even if you never walk and cycle at all, I hope that's not the case, but even for those people, in the listening audience out there who never walk and cycle at all. By walking and cycling, by promoting more walking and cycling, it's less traffic congestion even for the people who stay in their cars. It's less energy use for everybody. It means lower costs, lower price of gasoline, greater traffic safety. It's a wide, wide range of benefits, even for people who aren't going to be walking and cycling. But for those who are walking and cycling, it means greater physical health, greater mental health. It means saving money, giving you greater mobility, accessibility, a greater variety of ways to get around. So really a tremendous range of health benefits and also personal mobility benefits, environmental benefits, economic benefits of promoting more walking and cycling. Second point, 40% of all local trips, that is within an urban area, 40% of all trips in American metropolitan areas are 2 miles or shorter. Now, admittedly, there are some trips that are very long. You're not going to make them by walking and cycling. But I just want to say that 40% of all trips in our notoriously car-dependent, sprawled metropolitan areas are 2 miles or shorter. The notion that it's just impossible to walk or cycle here in the United States is just absurd. 40% of our trips are 2 miles or shorter. And a lot of us, I think it's like 25% are a mile or shorter. Now, those are certainly walkable, bikeable distances for a large percentage of the population. But I would argue the reason that so few Americans do walk and cycle is because in many cities, walking and cycling is simply considered unsafe. It's certainly perceived as being unsafe. The facilities are lousy. Come to New Jersey if you want to see some really bad cycling and walking facilities. Or you have issues of crosswalks that are poorly designed, not enforced. All of these pose really unpleasant and dangerous conditions, I think, for walking and cycling in the United States. But things can change. And that's probably one of the last points I wanted to make. That as you saw in the example of Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, and so forth, they dramatically improved their policies with respect to walking and cycling between the 1970s and the 1990s, and still currently they're working on it. They don't take anything for granted. Year for year for year, Dutch cities, Danish cities, German cities are working on perfecting their facilities. They build a bike lane or a bike path. Well, you know, this isn't working quite well enough. So then sort of perfecting the design over time and meeting with each other and sort of learning from each other. I think that's what we need to do as well. And I think we can learn a lot from Europe in this respect. Clearly, this is not Europe. We have different situations. We have different circumstances, different environment, and so forth. But I still think that many of the things that are being done in Europe can be adapted to some extent to the American situation to improve walking and cycling conditions here, and that we really need to get this in a way of a public information campaign, get this message to the public. If nothing else, you'll live longer and healthier and happier if you walk and bike more. Just remember that one sentence. Just tell people that. For every hour you're walking or cycling, you're adding more than an hour to your expected healthy lifetime. Who can be opposed to that? I mean, that's surely got to be the majority of your population. Let me stop there, and then we can have the comments, okay?
Thank you so much, John. It's just wonderful. I'm inspired. I hope I don't have to move to Europe and that the European facilities can be brought here to make it that safer for everybody and healthier. I'd like to invite the three panelists up to the microphones there. And John, you can come back. There's another chair there. And we're going to have presentations by Grant House and Janet Wolf and Michael Chiakos. And Don Lubach will be moderating this for the four of us. And after they're through, there'll be time for questions. So Don Lubach from the University of California, take it over.
Hello. So when you invite one of the finest researchers out, great things happen. These three wonderful groups got together to bring this to Santa Barbara, and also some of the finest people from town show up to talk about these things. And then wonderful, our neighbors who care about our community are here. I'm not going to do long introductions because we want to hear from our panelists and also some more from Dr. Pucher, and also a chance for the audience to engage. So a couple of things. We're on television, and if you're really shy about asking a question, I still want to hear your question, and the panel does as well. So write it down and have someone deliver it to me or hand it to a less shy person beside you as the panel engages. And also, since we are limited on time, probably one question each, and then if we start to run out, then we'll loop it back around to you. So the panel, we have Supervisor Janet Wolf is here. Thank you. Sitting next to Janet is Grant House from the City Council and Mayor Pro Tem. He's a substitute mayor. That's right. Excellent. And Mark Chiakos is here from the Community Environmental Council and also head of the Fossil Free by 33 campaign. And you met the illustrious Dr. Pucher, who will chime in hopefully as well. Would you three be willing to do this to start? We'd like about 5 minutes or so of your what you were most excited about Dr. Pucher's talk. And if you would be willing to indulge me on this, would you start by, maybe you can reminisce about your first experience either on a bicycle or in a public transit situation, just so that we know something about you that we might not know otherwise. And you can go in any order, just as the spirit moves you.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and start. It's a great question. Well, my first experience wasn't actually a pleasant one. As a child growing up, I had two older brothers who had these pretty nifty bikes, and my dad was an industrial arts teacher, so when it came time to get me a new nifty bike, my dad decided that the best way to get me the bike was just to cut off the bar from my brother's bike. So that was I wanted a little pink bike, and I didn't get the pink bike. I got the bike that had the bar missing. So it was a little disappointing. So that was my first initial kind of negative experience until I came to UCSB and I got my first bike. And you know, some of those things you just never forget. And I was so excited because it was a shiny red bike, and I was so excited to have left Los Angeles and to come to UCSB where biking was so embraced, and then of course to have this new bike was extra special. And then the other part of your question, and when I came in and I saw some of the slides going through, and I talked to John briefly, and I just got a glimpse of what he was going to be talking about, and certainly was very excited to hear what he was going to speak about. But I was the health aspect of walking or riding your bike is so important, and we hear about it a lot. We hear about it as it relates to obesity and children and diabetes, and I have a very special interest in that. And as a supervisor, what I've tried to do, and you talk about public policy, and there's certainly larger things that I can do as it relates to zoning or issues as it relates to employees. But one small thing that I've done is that I've instituted a walk and talk program because people love to talk to the supervisor. And I realized soon after I got into office that if I had lunch and dinner with everyone who wanted to talk to me, I'd have a real big problem. So I instituted a walk and talk program, and of course my office is right here, and what I do is I take a small little pad of paper, and I tell the person ahead of time to bring their walking shoes, and we walk around town, and they talk to me, and I write down their notes, and so it's been that has been very exciting for me, and it's been well received. People enjoy doing that just as much as I do. The kind of modified walk and talk has to do with a cookie example. If I do meet someone for dinner, let's say down at Brophy Brothers or at the beach, I like to combine it with a walk along the beach. So I get I know I'm going to have the dinner, so we'll do the walk first. And so just getting back to that, I think the health aspect was particularly impressive, and I appreciated your whole speech. I thought was great. Thank you.
Well, I guess we'll just go down the lines. All right. Okay. So anyway, we're reminiscing now a little bit. Oh my goodness. I check them off. I told you the story about when my mom was working at the Fruhoff Blueprint Place near Cleveland when I was a kid that I just wasn't settled with that, and I took my little tricycle into the back fence and was pedaling down the big freeway the wrong way to go see her. And it's my first recorded bike experience was, out of some necessity to do with my mom, and she did leave the job, and she did say, oh my goodness, I just told that. In any case, what an experience. My second experience with bike was a terrible experience. I remember I had this little blue bike, and it was the coolest thing. I used to ride. But I remember one day when we were just getting crazy. You know how the kids do the extreme sports right now? My first experience with extreme sports on bikes was the time my feet left the pedal on a bumpy side next to the sidewalk, and I got to ride that bar you were talking about a minute ago. One summer I sold Christmas cards in New Jersey, in Linwood, New Jersey, near Atlantic City. Christmas cards all summer, sold, so I could earn my first 5-speed bike. And I was the first student on our campus at Madison College in Harrisonburg, Virginia, at least in a long time that I knew of. There was one other faculty member that did, but I was the first one to have a bicycle. And now the campus, which has grown to 20 or 30,000 like UCSB, has thousands and thousands of bicycles, but I got to be the bike guy to fix bikes then. So it becomes part of your life. I still have bruises, though, from that second experience. But there were some things that I just was aware of in preparing actually to be here and wanted to be aware of was what we've done so far. And when you were talking about policy and the foundation that's necessary, holy smokes. I mean, in our area, we have really got a strong policy foundation for biking and walking. The city of Santa Barbara, certainly, with the circulation element that we adopted and its strong call for a balance in equity with regards to the different modes, and the implementing measures, the pedestrian master plan, the bicycle master plan, and then going into urban design with our urban design guidelines and looking over those policies. I mean, we are solid, but look at the county, too. Thinking back when Ann Lawler...
Not as good.
Well, but when Ann Lawler, remember? And
we're working to get...
You're doing very well, though, actually. If you look at it from a policy perspective, not so much the implementation, so we have to work on that. But I'm looking back at people who have been actively involved in this for many years, the Bike Coalition. Thank you so much, because you understood early on the relationship between a regional transportation plan and a regional transportation improvement plan, the RTP and RTIP. If you don't know that kind of stuff, you don't get the policy foundation for the time when it comes for funding. The thing that most caught me, though, which I was so glad you included, was the slide where the image on the street showed kids playing with a ball in the house there. It's my fundamental belief, and I think we share this, that when you're walking or bicycling, the world is a different world from when you're in a car. I mean, it's not like it just looks different. It's a different world. You experience everything completely differently. The scale, what you relate to, what you smell, what you feel, the heat, when you're exercising, the world, and exercising by even walking, the necessity of meeting the demands of your body also change your relationship with yourself. You don't just see yourself differently, you are different. So, I mean, when we talk about scales of things and stuff, people like to be in close, like we're going to go over here to this little restaurant. It's a little canyonized place where everybody in the world likes to go. You know, when people like and see the world differently when they bike and walk. And so there's a fundamental shift, and that was represented for me. The space between homes, which just happens to be paved, for a kid is a commonplace that's perfect for playing ball or doing this, that, or the next thing. It's dangerous because the car's there. How do we address that?
Great. Thank you, John, for such a fascinating and inspiring speech. My name is Michael Chiakos. I'm a board member of the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition and also work on transportation issues for the Community Environmental Council. And reminiscing, I actually grew up here in Santa Barbara, and one of my favorite early bike experiences was actually teaching my brother to bicycle. And this was my mom, who's in the audience right now, worked at the Montessori Center School. And I remember one summer, you know, we often would spend the summers kind of hanging out around Montessori Center while she was teaching. And my brother wanted to learn how to ride a bike. And, you know, there's just pavement around, and, you know, learning to ride a bike, you can fall over a lot. So my friend Scott and I had the great idea that he would start riding the bike, and then we had these pillows and carpets. And if he started to fall, we'd just throw it under there so that he'd have a soft landing. My brother's a very athletic guy. He learned how to bike very quickly. We didn't have to throw the pillow much, but it's a funny little story. So one of the most interesting things about your talk is the environmental aspects, because I do work for the CEC, and I just wanted to comment a little bit about fossil fuels and the environmental aspects of biking. So most of you are probably aware with CEC we have our Fossil Free by 33 program, and this is a very ambitious but achievable goal to wean our region off of fossil fuels in 1 generation. And to do this, we put together a very complete blueprint that has step-by-step directions to how our community can do that. And one thing that we saw when putting together our blueprint is that transportation is a huge part of it. It's about 48% of our energy demand here in Santa Barbara County. And that's about 200 million gallons of gas, diesel, jet fuel used every year. So that's an enormous challenge, and my job there is to look at the transportation sector, and we've looked at all the policies and modes and options for reducing energy use in the transportation sector. And what you see when you look at this is that there's no silver bullet to get out of our transportation woes. You know, sorry to say, bicycling probably won't save the day. It's part of it. Neither will biofuels or electric vehicles or mass transit. But there's no silver bullet. But what there is a silver buckshot approach. And you need to do all these things in tandem and together. And if we work on all these things concurrently, we can really have a huge effect. So I'm happy to say that bicycling was in the top 6 of the main recommendations and the main things that we're going to be starting to, that we're working on. And I wanted to share a calculation with you. Here in Santa Barbara County, our bicycle trip rate is much higher than in the rest of the nation, which is a little less than 1%. We're about 3% here, different for the county or the city and how you measure it. But if we could get to that rate of 15% of Santa Barbara County residents biking each day, right? So 15%, which is very achievable as we've seen in other countries, 15% of residents biked 8 miles per day, we would collectively bicycle over 200 million miles a year. That's pretty impressive. That would save us 8.6 million gallons of gas. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think one of the very important things that we can do with bicycling and walking, which you touched on a lot in your talk, was integrating it with other modes of transportation, particularly public transportation. And I just wanted to share, I'm on the Santa Barbara Bicycle list, listserv, emails, and a young man or a guy who's living in Lompoc recently shared a story. And he commutes from Lompoc to Goleta every day. He's been driving. And just in the last month, he decided that he was going to ride his bike to the train station, hop on the Amtrak to Goleta, and then get off and bike to work. And he said, I can't believe how long it took me to do this. I love it. It's wonderful. I get exercise. It's much less stress. I'm saving money because he's taking advantage of the monthly bus pass or the monthly train pass that Amtrak have. And it's such a great idea. I was up at a conference in the Bay Area, and I stayed with a friend in San Francisco. He let me borrow a bike to go get on Caltrain. And then Caltrain has these amazing bicycle cars. So you have 32 bicyclists and all their bicycles, and they have this racking system depending on where you're getting out. But there's all this camaraderie in the Caltrain, and everybody's just, hanging out, 32 people for each train. And I'm hoping that when Measure A passes, and we have on track to have retimed trains for commuter rail from Ventura to Santa Barbara, that we can incorporate really good bicycle facilities as well. So that's just a little bit of what I wanted to say. I'm also on the board of the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, which most of you know is a countywide bicycle advocacy organization. We promote bicycling at events like this one. We also have Bike Week, which is a very large event, bike to work day, bike to school day, rides, bike culture events. I'd highly recommend people to get involved in the Bicycle Coalition if you want to see this vision take place here in Santa Barbara. And another important thing that mostly Ralph and some of the other core volunteers of the Bicycle Coalition do is that they attend all these meetings, whether it be city or county or Caltrans, and they go and they advocate for bicyclists and bicyclist safety and improvements at all these different meetings. So that's a very other important thing that the coalition does. So I had one question for John, I guess, just to start this off. And I was very interested in the safety stats, because in my advocacy work, that's the main thing that people say to me is, I'd love to bicycle, or I'd love to have my kids bicycle, but I don't feel safe doing it. And I firmly believe that the health benefits of bicycling outweigh, any additional risk and safety. But I noticed that if in Europe the rates are about 10 times less chance of being injured or being in an accident, that bicycling is probably safer than driving in these other countries. And I just wanted to see if John could comment a little bit on that. And then also give us, you've biked around Santa Barbara now, you've seen how things are here. We have, if you could just give us the top 3 things, the lowest hanging fruit that we could do here, things that just came to your mind. We have a lot of, policymakers and government staff that are working on these issues in the room right now. I think we'd all appreciate really hearing what you think the lowest hanging fruit that we can do to make biking safer and encourage more bicycling in Santa Barbara.
Okay. Not so easy. I do think that probably the most important step in terms of making cycling safer is starting out, there's a number, there's no one thing. I really would introduce bike and walking training programs, education programs in the schools. I think that if you have to start somewhere, it's awfully important. It does take a little while to improve the infrastructure, which needs to be done as well. If I had to start just one place, I would probably start in the schools, trying to encourage kids to cycle, teaching them safe cycling and walking behavior. And I think that the Safe Routes to Schools program is a really important step in that direction. But I think it can be taken even farther. I think you could do more in terms of the training and education, such as they have in these Dutch and Danish and German schools. And I think it will become a cumulative kind of an impact, that as you have more and more kids getting this cycling training, more and more of these sort of Safe Routes to Schools programs, that more and more kids will be doing this. Parents will be more comfortable letting their kids cycle and walk to school. And I think that is maybe one of the keys. But combined with that, and sort of starting, I'm not sure if it's exactly low-hanging fruit, but providing on those routes that are key, especially getting to schools, providing the good crosswalks, providing the bike lanes, the bike paths, and enforcing the regulations at these intersections to be sure that the motorists are respecting the rights of the pedestrians and the cyclists, but especially for the kids. The future, I think, is in our kids. And so I think in terms of probably the most cost-effective strategy would be perhaps getting kids cycling and teaching them how to cycle, how to watch out for traffic and so forth. And combined with that, then I really think that the traffic calming of residential neighborhoods is absolutely crucial. This is something, it's not a high-cost measure, and we can see in terms of safety, I mentioned before, day and night, before and after, 60 to 80% reduction in child traffic fatalities and injuries as a result of traffic calming. Again, different neighborhoods have different kinds of streets and different kinds of traffic calming possibilities. But I think that in a sense, you can see the case of Berlin, for example. You had 4,000 kilometers of traffic-calmed residential streets, and you had 1,000 kilometers of separate sort of bikeways and bike lanes. And I think in a way, maybe even the traffic calming of streets is going to be more quickly done and maybe more cost-effective. You're going to have a larger network. But that doesn't negate the importance of having the bikeway network and the bike lanes as well. But I really can't tell you how important I think the traffic calming of neighborhoods is, because it then also, as you were mentioning before, it allows kids to view their streets as part of their front yards. They can play in the streets, and I think parents can feel more comfortable then. One of the reasons, by the way, there has been actually a tremendous, I'm sorry to go on too long, but there has been a tremendous reduction in child cycling fatalities over the past 30 years. But unfortunately, it's because fewer and fewer kids are cycling. It's because parents feel that it's so dangerous. They're not even letting their kids cycle. And I think if we were to comprehensively, and this is, by the way, the key to traffic calming success, doing it on an area-wide basis. You can't just traffic calm this street or that street. Same thing with car-free zones. You have to do it on an area-wide basis, the whole neighborhood. Otherwise, you simply divert the traffic to a neighboring street, and you make things worse for those streets. So I think, I'm not exactly answering your question, but I do think traffic calming is absolutely crucial, and that's where the kids are playing, probably spending most of their time, and then combining that with the kind of education and training programs in the schools and combine that with the Safe Routes to Schools and improving specifically, focusing the facility improvements on the kinds of routes that the children are most likely to take to get to school. I think if I had to focus on that, that'd probably be it.
Don, may you comment on the first
Yes,
part of it?
yes. So I'd like, just real quick, I would like both of you to be able to engage or ask a question of the guests, and then I can tell a lot of people want to ask questions. So let's complete that and then go. Thank you.
If I may, very quickly, I know that Eva is here with the Safe Routes to School program that we have, and Courtney Dietz is here too with our Santa Barbara Walks, and education is a critical component of that. And what's been really remarkable has been how well received it is. The parents seem to really get into it. We can definitely use more volunteers, more people to participate in that, but it seems like there's a certain age where this is electrifying and fun and exciting, and the earlier you can kind of grasp the kids and get them involved. But also, Dr. Drew Von Hengel is here. She's our mobility coordinator from the city of Santa Barbara, and I've had a chance to ride with her on adult training, and I learned stuff. You know, I mean, it was really pretty great to be given some guidance. And how do you take your part of the street and do it in a safe way? How do you cross that intersection? So for adults and kids as well. And I just wanted to just raise this for everybody here to be alert to. There is really quite, as you know, quite a push and shove when we talk about traffic calming in neighborhoods. Neighborhoods themselves recognize the need for it. It's the number one thing in my walking around as I was running for election that people brought up was the need to have this pace of traffic in the neighborhoods slow down. And then when you engage the actual neighbors, they get involved. But there's this larger perception, I guess, maybe from the outside of that particular neighborhood, that that's taking away a fundamental right somehow of a person to move unimpededly through a neighborhood in their vehicle. And so there's a real clash there, and we've experienced it here in Santa Barbara, and I guess it'll just really take more of the grassroots interest in this to be able to overcome that over time. But the education part, we're really working hard on that, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that right out of the chute.
Yeah, I'd also like to comment on the education part. I know in Goleta for a period of time we had bike rodeos where the sheriffs would come, and but I was and would work with the children and set up kind of an obstacle course and do some training. But I think what you brought up was very interesting, and that is actually going out into the street, giving the kids a license per se or a certificate of completion. I think those types of suggestions I think were very good. But you know, as Grant pointed out, we have people like Eva who are pretty much our eyes and ears in the community. And I know as a supervisor, I appreciate when I get phone calls about certain issues that would make bike riding safer. We just had an issue at San Marcos High School. And so we need to be open to hearing from and making sure that constituents can come to us and make suggestions, which, you know, then in turn we will refer it to Public Works and so forth. Sometimes, and by the way, I do believe that the county does do an excellent job. In fact, I put out front, this is a bike map, Santa Barbara County bike map, and so there, and I give a lot of credit to Matt Dobertine, who is our alternative transportation czar, what I call him. And so, you know, particularly in the 2nd District, I feel very lucky that we have we have an incredible bike system. It's not perfect, though, and a lot of it does have to do with funding so that we can ensure that the bike paths are maintained, and that goes back to Measure A. And in fact, I put some material out on the front desk regarding Measure A if anyone is interested in finding out how you might be able to help with that. I think this out because I loved your charts comparing Europe and the United States, and you know, I've been to Barcelona and have seen the bikes that are rented, but I wonder if you could comment on the notion of time. It seems that in the United States we're rushing. And whether or not you have traffic calming devices, you know, you can see parents taking their kids to school, and everyone's in a rush, everyone's late. I think the notion of even, you know, riding a bike to work, well, people might say, well, it's going to take me longer, although you did have a chart up that pretty much discounted that. But I think in our society here, in the United States, we look at that as almost being an overarching concern, that we, and I think we need to have a whole behavioral shift in understanding that we need to push back a little bit when it comes to time. We need to take the time. It's kind of like living simply. We need to take the time to do the right thing. And I don't, you know, it's going to be a lot of work. I think maybe this energy crisis has given people the opportunity to experience other modes of transportation that they may not have done before, and by doing that, they're saying, gee, you know what, this whole time element, maybe I could give up a little bit of that for the benefits of using alternative transportation or riding my bike or doing something like that.
How many of you have read the book called In Praise of Slow? Oh, you should. It's a wonderful book. There's a chapter on slow eating, slow transportation, yes, even slow sex. There really is. But, very interesting chapters. But the point that they make is, for example, we eat so fast, we hardly even realize we're eating. It's as if, you know, we don't taste what we're eating. It's just, we're not even aware of what we're doing. I mean, this is true for eating. I mean, I think it's true of traveling as well. When I'm walking or cycling, I'm hearing the birds. I'm feeling the breeze. I feel the warmth on my skin. I mean, I'm meeting people. I'm talking to people. I'm really experiencing my environment, and it's enriching my life. And I see people in their cars speeding past me, and, you know, maybe they have, I don't know, their iPod, what do you put on, iPods? Is that what they're called? iPods? Whatever it is. And it's like they're in these hermetically sealed compartments, and usually in New Jersey in a traffic jam, very upset. And this is the time of the day they wish didn't even exist. I mean, it's like negative time for them. They want it to go as fast as possible. I think this perception of time, rushing through life, rushing through eating, through transportation, in many, many different aspects of life, I wish we could really slow down. And I think in this particular book, they really do advocate more walking and cycling as part of a strategy for slowing down your life and becoming more aware of what's around you and enriching your life. And, you know, the other thing that struck me, speaking of speed, if you go to the Netherlands or to Denmark or to Germany and you watch people cycling, the rate at which they cycle is also slower than the rate at which you see people cycling here, in general. It's a considerable, and part of the reason is who cycles. You have lots of kids cycling, lots of elderly cycling. You have as many women as men. I mean, everyone is cycling. And I would just guess, I don't know exactly what the rate is, but on average, the speed of cycling is probably slower there than it is here. You don't really see fancy bikes and Lycra and people in fancy helmets and so forth. I mean, you're talking about a very practical bike. So even in cycling, you see this difference, and people just aren't in as much of a hurry. And it's part of the experience of getting around. I cycle fairly slowly myself.
You know, when one of the things that we were learning about traffic calming in neighborhoods near schools in particular, but traffic pace is slowed down. If it's done well, it may not be done well, but if it's done well, the pace is slowed down. But if you actually count the amount of time it takes to get through the neighborhood, you actually flow through the neighborhood and get through the other side in a shorter period of time. The four-way stop sign, you just get this race between the stop signs, you know, and then you just have to stop and wait, and then you go and race again, stop, wait. So actually, if it's done well, you can actually make people essentially be more efficient with their time. Same thing probably is true. If somebody did a study, I'm sure it's been done, with the amount of time it takes to get into your car, get all loaded up, get everything ready, get down to where you're going to park your car, find a parking place, finally get it parked, then you have to walk. Oh, you're a walker anyway. You're going to walk all the way over to where you're finally going to get to. If you could have just gotten on your bicycle and ridden over to that place, as long as it's 1 or 2 miles, you'd be there quicker.
A perfect example of this is, I mean, sort of how you're saving time by being slower. Traffic calm your neighborhoods. The kids can play in the streets. They don't have to be driven 2 or 3 miles to a park that's farther away. I mean, when I was a kid, I just played right in the street or in the backyard. It wasn't a matter of being driven 5 miles to a soccer field or whatever. We simply played in our own neighborhoods.
And thank you. Thank you to all our panelists. It was really, really good bringing it down to a local level, because that's really, I hate to say this, where the rubber hits the road. It's such, I need a better metaphor here. Anyway, I have a couple of announcements. We will have a walk, a slow walk, to some of Santa Barbara's traffic calming devices with John Pucher. So anyone who didn't get to ask their question will have an opportunity to talk to John more at length and in a very slow and leisurely environment. The walk will leave from Stateside side right after we're finished with lunch, Stateside restaurant, and will be around town. So you're all invited to come on that. That should be fun. The other announcement was that COAST, Coalition for Sustainable Transportation, will have a party next week on Thursday the 23rd of October at the Amtrak train station. That will give you a chance to find out more about all our terrific programs, because just like you say, it has a lot. We need a lot of different approaches. You can find out more about our fabulous Safe Routes to School program, which we're really proud of. We will be honoring some of those unsung heroes that are really doing the work in the trenches. So please do come. Consider yourselves invited. We have invites out on the front table. It's from 5 to 7:30 at the Amtrak station. So please join us for that. Anything else I should be saying?
I just have one thing. I have something that I just pulled out of the county first floor. 50 ways to leave your car. So if anyone wants any of these, I have them.
All right. So thank you for coming on a Saturday morning. Come to lunch, or come for the walk, or come to the train party.
Let's thank John for being here. What a great guy.
I know.